had been living alone for 3 years now. At 25, my life was simple. Work at a small furniture shop 3 blocks from my apartment, come home, and repeat the next day. I had friends, but they had all moved on, settled down with families. We rarely met now, but I didn't mind. The quiet was comfortable even in my solitude. My small apartment was my sanctuary, a place where I felt safe, content. I wasn't lonely. I had work. I had peace. What more could I ask for? It was a rainy afternoon, my day off. The sound of raindrops tapping on the windows made everything feel cozy. I made myself some Korean vegetable soup, perfect for the weather, and then curled up in bed with a book. As the pages pulled me deeper into another world, the sound of a loud knock echoed through my apartment. Startled, I sat up. A knock? On a day like this? Who could it be? I never had visitors. I reluctantly left the comfort of my bed and approached the door. I opened it slightly, just enough to peek through. A man stood there, drenched from the rain, holding an umbrella. He wore a black jacket, gray jogging pants, and a cap with LA printed on it. He looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s, his smile too big, too eager. "Can I help you?" I asked cautiously. "I'm looking for someone. Sarah? Do you know her?" His voice was calm, almost casual. I shook my head. "No, I don't know any Sarah. I live alone." Without waiting for a response, I closed the door. Something about him felt off. I wanted to get back to my book, to my peace. But then, there was another knock, louder this time. I sighed, annoyed, and opened the door again. The man was still there, looking at me with those same unervingly bright eyes. "Can I have some water?" he asked, his voice oddly soft. For a moment I hesitated. He looked soaked, cold. Maybe he was just some guy who got caught in the rain. Against my better judgment, I nodded. "Wait here," I said, turning to go to the kitchen. I didn't lock the door behind me. I should have, but I told myself it would only take a second. The kitchen was just a few steps away. I grabbed a glass, filled it with water, and headed back to the door. But when I returned, my heart sank. The man was inside. He was standing just a few steps from the doorway, looking around my apartment like he belonged there. I froze. "Please step outside," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I handed him the water, hoping he'd take it and leave. He took the glass, drank it quickly, and placed it on the small table next to him. "So, you live alone?" he asked, his tone too casual, too comfortable. Panic began to rise in my chest. "Please leave, or I'll call the police," I said firmly, trying to sound braver than I felt. My phone was in the bedroom, just a few steps away. I just needed to get to it, lock myself inside, and call for help. The man's eyes wandered around the room, ignoring my plea. "It's raining," he said, his voice low. "I just need a place to stay until it stops." I inched backward toward my bedroom, trying to think of a way out. I didn't want to be trapped. The man was tall, at least 6 feet, and I felt small, vulnerable. Should I run for the door or lock myself in the bedroom? My mind raced. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking now. "Can I use your phone?" he asked, stepping closer. "I need to call someone." That was my chance. "Sure," I said quickly, trying to keep calm. "I'll go get it." I moved slowly into my bedroom, closed the door behind me, and locked it. My hands were trembling as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice was barely steady as I told the operator what was happening. "Please hurry," I whispered. "Miss?" The man called from the other side of the door. "Where's the phone? I need it. Just leave," I shouted through the door. There was a pause, and then I heard the doorknob rattle. He was trying to open it. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away from the door. "Hurry," I urged the operator. I could hear the man fumbling with something, maybe a knife, trying to pry the lock open. Then he started throwing his weight against the door, slamming into it with force. "Stop!" I screamed, but he didn't. Each slam was louder, more desperate. I felt trapped, helpless. There was nothing in my room to defend myself with. The sirens were faint at first, but then they grew louder, closer. The man must have heard them too because the banging stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then I heard footsteps, running footsteps, fading away. When the police arrived, the man was gone. They searched the building and eventually found him, hiding in a garbage bin behind the apartment. He was arrested, but I later found out he was released just a few days after. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed my things and left, finding a new place, but the memory of that day followed me. Every knock on the door now sends a chill down my spine. And every time it rains, I can't help but feel like he's out there, waiting for another chance. It was a quiet afternoon, one of those days when everything felt just a bit slower. I met my friend at a nearby convenience store for some snacks and casual conversation. We sat by the window, watching people go about their day. The sun still bright but starting to dip lower in the sky. We chatted about work, weekend plans, just the usual stuff. Nothing out of the ordinary. At one point, while my friend was mid-sentence, I noticed a guy sitting alone near the back of the store. He kept glancing in my direction, but I brushed it off. I didn't want to seem paranoid or overthink things. People glance at others all the time in public spaces, right? I didn't tell my friend. It didn't seem important. We continued eating, laughing at silly things, and when it was time to leave, we said our goodbyes. My friend got in her car and drove off, and I started walking home. I lived just a few blocks away from the store, so walking was part of my routine. It was around 4 p.m., still daylight, and the air had a coolness to it that I enjoyed. I took my time, savoring the weather, the quiet. As I reached my apartment building, I started climbing the stairs to my third-floor unit. I didn't think much about the day, already letting my mind wander to what book I'd read later. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. Someone was also ascending the stairs. For a second, I thought nothing of it, assuming it was just another tenant. But as I climbed higher, the footsteps stayed close, too close. A sinking feeling hit me. Whoever that was, they were following me. I was the only one living on that floor. My heart began to race. When I reached the third-floor landing, I glanced over my shoulder, just barely. My breath caught in my throat. It was him, the guy from the convenience store, the one who kept looking at me. He wasn't far behind, his eyes fixed on me. My mind screamed at me to stay calm, to not let on that I knew he was following me. I kept walking down the narrow hallway to my apartment, trying to appear casual, like nothing was wrong. But I could feel him getting closer, his steps quickening. No one else lived on my floor, it was just me. I had no one to call out to for help. The hallway stretched out longer than it ever had before. I was almost at my door, my keys clenched in my hand. As I reached the door, I fumbled with the lock, my fingers trembling. I could hear him approaching, his pace faster now, like he was ready to close the distance between us. I managed to get the door open just as he started running toward me. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it as fast as I could. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. Then the banging started. He was hitting the door with his fists, each slam louder than the last. I backed away, terrified. I could hear him breathing, muttering something I couldn't make out between the slams. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called the cops, my voice barely steady enough to explain what was happening. "Please hurry," I begged the operator. The pounding continued for what felt like an eternity. My entire body was frozen in fear. Then suddenly it stopped. There was a silence that was almost worse than the noise. I didn't dare move from where I stood, waiting, listening. The police arrived a few minutes later, but by then, the man was gone. They searched the building and surrounding area, but he had disappeared without a trace. They couldn't arrest anyone without catching him in the act. For days after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching me, waiting for another chance. I barely left my apartment, too scared to even go to the store. Couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow, felt like him creeping closer. I checked my locks over and over, but the fear stayed. Eventually, I moved to a new place, somewhere far from the apartment where it all happened. But the fear never fully left me. Now, every time I'm outside, I find myself glancing over my shoulder, checking for someone following me. Feels like he's always there, just out of sight, waiting. I know it's probably all in my head, but that doesn't make it any less real. The day started like any other. I was 8 years old, my hair cascading down to my waist in waves, almost like a veil. My mom, ever careful, had braided it into tight pigtails before we left for the park. We were going to roller skate, my cousin Diane, her mom, and me. The sun was high, the park nearly empty, and the wide space felt like ours alone. After an hour of skating, I was drenched in sweat, but the fun kept me going. Diane, bigger and stronger than me, had to stop. Her mom called her over to wipe her down. I watched her for a bit, then drifted toward the shaded part of the park, near a massive oak tree that stretched its branches like arms across the playground. It was cooler there, quieter. That's when I noticed the car. It pulled up silently, parking just beyond the tree. The man who stepped out didn't seem to fit in with the park. A little too well-dressed, too stiff, but I didn't think much of it. I was more focused on the small circles I was skating in, feeling the gentle sway of the cool air under the tree. Then, a man approached me. His face looked ordinary, like any other dad at the park, but something in his eyes, something hollow, made my stomach twist. "Hey," he said, pointing towards my aunt and cousin, who were now sitting at a bench, eating sandwiches. "That lady over there, she's calling you. You should go to her." I paused. I hadn't heard her voice, but maybe I missed it. He nudged me forward, not aggressively, but enough to make me uneasy. "Come on," he insisted, his hand lightly pushing against my shoulder. I started skating towards them, but the closer I got, the more something felt wrong. As I neared the car, one of its doors was wide open, the inside dark and foreboding. A chill crept up my spine. Then it happened. The man stepped in front of me, cutting off my path. Before I could react, his hand shot out, gripping my arm hard. I tried to pull back, but his hold tightened. And then I felt it. A yank on my hair so sharp, I thought my scalp would tear away. I screamed as another pair of hands dragged me by my braid towards the open car door. The world spun into chaos. I could hear my aunt's voice, shrill and terrified, screaming my name. My legs flailed, hitting the man who had me by my waist, but his grip only grew stronger. I thrashed, clawing at the air, my vision blurring with panic. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, like wood snapping, and my aunt appeared, her face twisted in a fury I had never seen before. She swung her bag wildly, hitting the man hard across the head. He stumbled back, loosening his grip just enough for me to wrench free, my hair slipping from the other man's grasp. People were shouting now, running towards us. The men panicked, their faces contorting in frustration as they jumped into the car. Tires screeched as they sped away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the echo of my screams. I collapsed into my aunt's arms, shaking, as she held me tight, whispering that I was safe, that they were gone. But in that moment I didn't feel safe. I could still feel the hands, cold and forceful, yanking me towards the dark void of that car. The rest of the day was a blur of police sirens, questions, and trembling hands. The park, once full of laughter, was now a place of nightmares. I never went back, and even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that, somewhere out there, those men are still waiting for another girl with long hair to wander too close to their car. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that should have felt peaceful. The air was warm, and the streets were calm as I brought my dog, Charlie, to the groomer we always used. They were busy that day with dogs lined up for their trims and baths, so they told me to come back in 3 hours. Plenty of time to kill, I thought. I wandered over to the nearby mall, had a snack, bought groceries, and even picked up some treats for Charlie. Time passed quickly enough, and before long, I was heading back to pick him up. It was just another normal day, or so I thought. As I parked in front of the shop, I was ready to grab my bags and head inside. But just as I reached for the door handle, something terrifying happened. A man, disheveled and wild-eyed, appeared out of nowhere. I barely had time to react before he swung open the back door of my car and jumped inside. His face, there was something wrong with it. His eyes were too wide, too hungry, his grin a little too sharp. He stared at me like he knew exactly what he wanted to do, and I froze, cold fear creeping into my bones. "Drive," he growled, his voice low and threatening. For a split second, I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest as my mind scrambled for a way out. Without thinking, I wrenched open my door and bolted from the car. I ran straight for the groomer's door, but I felt it. The man's hand, cold and rough, grabbing at the back of my shirt. I yanked myself free, but he followed, his footsteps pounding behind me. The world seemed to slow as I stumbled into the shop. The familiar smell of shampoo and wet dogs filled the air, but it didn't feel comforting anymore. The staff and other customers froze, their eyes wide with shock as they saw what was happening. No one moved. They just stared, frozen in fear or disbelief, as the man lunged towards me, catching my shirt again, this time tighter, his grip like iron. I screamed and tried to pull away, my back hitting the glass door with a thud. The room was filled with chaos. Dogs barking frantically, people shouting, but nobody stepped in to help. The man was pulling me closer, his breath hot and ragged on my neck, when I saw the glint in his hand. A knife. Terror gripped me, far worse than his hands ever could. I fought back, kicking and clawing, but he was too strong. Every second felt like a lifetime, my mind racing with the thought that this could be the end. The customers watched helplessly, some backing away, others too stunned to even move. Then, in the distance, I heard it, the faint wail of sirens. They were getting louder, closer. I didn't know who had called the police, but I clung to the sound like a lifeline. The door to the shop flew open, and in an instant, 4 officers rushed in. They grabbed the man, ripping him away from me with force. He thrashed and snarled, his knife clattering to the ground as they pinned him down. Finally, I was free. The shop was eerily quiet after that. The only sounds were the whimpering dogs and my own ragged breathing. I watched as the police dragged the man away, his eyes still locked on mine, filled with malice. He never said a word, but his expression was enough. It was as if he had chosen me, specifically, and nothing would have stopped him if they hadn't arrived. In the days that followed, I tried to put it behind me, but the fear clung to me like a shadow. Then the news broke. The man had been wanted in another city, a serial attacker, preying on random women in broad daylight. He had fled to our city to hide, to continue what he had started. I couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been. How, if I hadn't fought back, if the police hadn't arrived in time, I might never have walked out of that groomer's shop alive. And even now, whenever I park my car, I feel the invisible weight of his presence, like he's still out there watching, waiting. Some nightmares don't fade when you wake up.